So here we have a number line with 0.42, 0.43 and 0.44 labelled. So the labelled values are going up in hundredths, but to get from 100th to the next, notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 small lines, and 10 thousandths is the same as 100th, so these small lines must be thousandths. So what number is the arrow pointing to here? Well, it's 3 lines, so 3 thousandths after 0.42, so that's 0.423. Now we have 1 thousandth after 0.43, so that's 0.431. Now we have 5 thousandths after 0.43, so that's 0.435. And finally we have 0.438, and notice 0.438 is less than 0.44. To understand why that is, what I like to do when I see decimals on number lines is to add a 0 on the end of the labelled values. So instead of 0.42, we can write 0.420, and then we can also put a 0 on the end of 0.43 and 0.44, because remember, putting a 0 on the end of a decimal doesn't change the number, but it does make it easier to see the values that we labelled. So here we had 0.423, then 0.431, 0.435 and 0.438, and if we remember that 0.44 is the same as 0.440, then it's easier to understand why 0.438 is less than 0.44. In fact, we can see that it's 2 thousandths less. So now we have a number line with 0.99, 1 and 1.01 labelled. Now 1 is 100th more than 0.99 and 1.01 is 100th more than 1. So the values we have labelled again are going up in hundredths, which means the small lines in between what we have labelled must be thousandths, because remember, 10 thousandths is the same as 100th. So here the arrow is pointing 4 thousandths after 0.99, so that's 0.994. Here we have 1 thousandth after 1, so that's 1.001, because the third digit after the decimal point is the thousandths digit, and each of these small lines represents 1 thousandths, so we need 0 in our tenths and hundredths to show that this 1 is 1 thousandth. Now we have 1.004, so 1 whole and 4 thousandths, and finally we have 1.009, so notice 1.009 is 1 thousandth less than 1.01, and it's easier to see if we write zeros on the end of our decimals so that they have 3 decimal places. Instead of 0.99, we can write 0.990, because putting a 0 on the end of a decimal doesn't change the number. Now for 1, we can also write the number 1 with 3 decimal places. That's 1.000, because we can always put a decimal point and then zeros on the end of a whole number, and that doesn't change the number. Finally, 1.01 can be written as 1.010. So when decimals are labelled on a number line, it's useful to write them all with the same number of decimal places, and that makes it easier to identify values on the number line. So first, we had to identify that this was 0.994, then we had 1.001, then 1.004, and then 1.009. So because all of the decimals that we have labelled have 3 decimal places, you can see that putting these values on the number line isn't any more difficult than if we had a number line with 990, 1000 and 1010 labelled. Now for this number line we have 2.1, 2.11 and 2.12. Again, the values that we have labelled are going up in hundredths, which means these small lines in between the hundredths must be thousandths. So here we have 3 thousandths after 2.1. That's 2.103, and it's really important that we remember the 0 in our hundredths, because these lines are thousandths, and to show 3 thousandths we need to write the thousandths digit as the 3rd digit after the decimal point, so we need a 0 in our hundredths digit. If we wrote 2.13, that wouldn't make sense, because you can see that after the value we need to label, we have 2.11, then 2.12, so 2.13 would be the next labelled value if we continued the same number line. So we need 2.103. So here we have 2.109, and notice that that's 1,000th less than 2.11. Here we have 2.113 because that's 3 thousandths after 2.11, and here we have 2.119. Again, what we could have done was change the labelled values so that they all have 3 decimal places. So instead of 2.1, we can write 2.100, because putting zeros on the end of a decimal number doesn't change the value of that number. For 2.11, we could have written 2.110, so again we've got 3 digits after the decimal point, and then we could have put a 0 on the end of 2.12. So now, if we look at the values that we had to label, here we had 2.103, here 2.109, and if we spot that 2.11 is the same as 2.110, it makes sense that 2.109 is 1,000th less than 2.11. Here we had 2.113, and finally our last value was 2.119. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that was helpful. If you're a teacher or a parent, then please subscribe or go to keystage2maths.com to download resources for this lesson and many more. That's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.